years ago, on the 14th of March 2013, Xi Jinping assumed office as the president of China. Prior to his ascension to this office, China had kept to itself with little contributions on the foreign scene. But all that was about to change. In September and October 2013, during visits to Kazakhstan and Indonesia, President Xi made stunning announcements. He unveiled a plan he had been working on for decades, a plan that goes back over 2,000 years, during the glory days of the Chinese Empire. This plan would lay the groundwork for China's new foreign policy, a policy that is set to put China on the map as not just another superpower, but one that is determined to lead from the front. Now, there are suspicions around that, apparently because this project is being led by China. However, it is good to mention that this new policy by China is set to lift over 7 million people out of poverty and has over 146 countries on board as at March 2022. Great numbers if you ask me, but while researching this story, I came across several red lines that left me wondering what the true cost of this project will be, and if at all it is worth it. This is a story of China's Belt and Road Initiative. A great plan, but one paid for by sweat and blood. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI for short, is a gigantic plan by the People's Republic of China to link Asia with Africa and Europe using a network of roads and maritime or shipping routes in order to increase trade and economic growth for the countries involved. Just hang in there a minute. I know that's a lot of jargon and it took me quite a while to understand it too, but here's the thing. Some 2,000 years ago, there was this trading route that connected China to the rest of the world. It was known as the Silk Road. This Silk Road was established during the Han Dynasty, a prosperous period for the old Chinese Empire that existed over 2,000 years ago. This ancient network of trade routes connected China to the Mediterranean for many centuries. It was the bedrock of China's global dominance during the era of the Chinese Empire. The Silk Road carried goods and ideas between the two great civilizations of Rome and China. Silk went westward, while wool, gold, and silver went east. China also received Christianity and Buddhism from India via the Silk Road, kind of like the good old days. But with the gradual loss of Roman territory in Asia and the rise of Arabian power in the eastern Mediterranean region of Western Asia, the Silk Road became increasingly unsafe and untraveled. Although part of the Silk Road still exists today in the form of a paved highway connecting Pakistan and the Uyghur region of Xinjiang, China. Now, this highway will be useful to our story much later, so keep that in mind. But why am I telling you about some trading routes that existed over 2,000 years ago? Well, it's all connected to this man right here. President Xi Jinping in 2013, shortly after coming into power, decided that he wanted China to take more responsibilities on the global scene. He wanted China to not only challenge the US as a superpower, but to try and take that mantle of leadership and be the main superpower. But instead of taking an aggressive route, he brought out his master plan, one that will revolutionize China's foreign policy and change global trade forever.
方得始终，我们唯有踔厉奋发，笃行不怠。
His plan was to model a trade network after the famous Silk Road we just talked about. Remember, this Silk Road existed during the heydays of the Chinese Empire. So this is like trying to bring back those glory days. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. According to Xi Jinping, the BRI, that is the Belt and Road Initiative, will consist of road networks, rail lines, seaports, airports, and communication networks, all of which will link China with the rest of the world. The seaports are aimed to link a 21st century sea route connecting China's coastal regions with Southeast and South Asia, the South Pacific, the Middle East, and Eastern Africa, all the way down to Europe. This is known as the Maritime Road Network. It is what forms the road in the name coined by President Xi. There are also on-land road networks being built that will link directly to China, like this highway I mentioned earlier in Pakistan. This is known as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a network that has cost China over $60 billion, but more on that later. When this plan was unveiled by President Xi over 8 years ago, he clarified that the BRI will have 5 major priorities. These include policy coordination, linkage of communities, economies, and nations through transport, communications, energy and water networks, open trade, a closely linked financial markets, and most importantly is connecting people. So after all the unveiling, countries vital to this project got on board and constructions began. These countries either got direct loans from Chinese state banks or from private entities that were part of the project. As soon as those monies were released, Chinese construction companies got to work in these countries, building what will be a 21st century trade network. But what countries are we talking about? Let's take a look at the countries involved in this project. The number of countries to have joined the BRI by signing a memorandum of understanding with China stands at around 146 as of when recording this video. Just take a look at this giant list of countries. I went through all of this and I can tell you this is pretty huge. This list is dated March 2022. The countries of the Belt and Road Initiative are spread across all continents. 43 countries are in Sub-Saharan Africa, 34 countries are in Europe and Central Asia, including 18 countries of the European Union that are part of the BRI. We have 25 countries in East Asia and Pacific, 20 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, 18 countries in Middle East and North Africa, and 6 countries are in Southeast Asia. And then we have the 7 countries of Austria, Benin, Comoros, Congo DR, Dominican Republic, Niger, and the Russian Federation. All of whom have not published a confirmation of signing a full MOU or even denied it completely. The project includes more than 2,600 mega projects in about 146 countries. There is no specified price tag for these mega projects, but estimates put it at around $4 to $8 trillion. I'll get into the financial aspect much later in the video, but these figures are mind-boggling. That is like 40% of the entire global economy. This project is said to affect over 60% of the entire world's population. This looks like China is trying to confirm its role as a global superpower. No wonder then why this plan seems to have ruffled some feathers in the West, as distrust in China and Chinese-led projects has been on the increase in Western countries. This has even led the United States and G7 launching their own program last year in an effort to counter the BRI. Some analysts have said that the Belt and Road is more of a label to capture what is going on, as there are a lot of projects under the umbrella. So we have no confirmed list of everything or everyone involved. But when I looked closer, I found something interesting in all of these projects. Something that confirms that the BRI is basically a way for China to gain access to trade routes across as many countries as possible to make their vast import and export easier. You have to know that this is paramount as China controls a large percentage of the global supply chain. Controlling the BRI then gives China direct access to resource countries to make trade easier for the Asian giant. But with access to these markets via loans and debt, China has been able to make these countries depend on them, giving China some sort of political leverage on the global stage. This is like saying, hey, why don't we come in and build roads, rail lines, seaports and airports, even communication networks for you? You need them but can't afford to build them yourself. We will lend you lots of money and bring in our experts to help you in building these structures. But here is where things get a little dark. There is no way China gives you a loan of this magnitude without some form of collateral, something they can hold as leverage. But before we get into what is in this for China, it is good I give you a perspective of what China is investing in these countries. So what's the real cost of the BRI? For the 70 BRI economic corridors, excluding China, projects in all sectors that are already executed, in implementation or planned are estimated to amount to $575 billion. But the big numbers being floated for President Xi Jinping's gigantic plan do not add up. Popular estimates for Chinese investments under the BRI range from $1 trillion to $8 trillion.
A closer look reveals that these figures are highly inflated, aimed at scoring political points for Beijing in the short term. But while that is cool for China, it also creates these unrealistic expectations.
There's also this other problem of transparency. You see, participation in the BRI is less meaningful than it might seem.
I mentioned earlier that roughly 146 countries have joined, but their levels of Chinese investment vary widely.
Pakistan has attracted some $60 billion for projects. South Korea signed up, but as at 2017, it had no BRI projects. And despite being among the most vocal critics of the BRI, India still attracted some Chinese investment.
So you see, participation in the BRI is not a prerequisite for doing related business with China, nor is participation a guarantee of more business. But that leaves us with one question. How does China fund this ridiculously expensive plan? China is the sponsor for this initiative, using its 4 state-owned banks. Some Western governments have criticized the Belt and Road for the lack of private sector participation. But the truth here is that there is little enthusiasm for the initiative from even the Chinese private sector due to the lack of return on investment.
Some of these projects are not even in use, like this huge international airport labeled the most empty international airport in the world. How do you convince the private sector to invest in a project such as this?
China funds this project with loans, huge loans that some of these countries may never be able to pay back, as with the situation in Sri Lanka. In case you are not familiar with that story.
This is the 𝗪𝗵𝗲𝗿𝗲 port in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government was unable to service the Chinese loans which funded the project, and the port was handed to the Chinese on a 99-year lease in 2017, echoing tactics employed by 19th century European imperialists against Qing Dynasty China.
The port now provides the Chinese with a major new piece of infrastructure and a strategic foothold in the Indian Ocean, another huge concern we'll look at shortly. But before we get into that, here are some things I found when looking through the financing of this project.
A new report on China's international development projects initiated between 2000 and 2017 demonstrates that extensive high-interest lending by China's state-backed banks has left countries across much of the developing world struggling under serious debt loads, even as some of the projects face major implementation problems.
You see, unlike funds provided by many Western governments, those loans are designed first and foremost to turn a profit for China.
This project is designed not just to cement new trading relationships with countries around the world, but to lock in China's access to natural resources and other commodities that it does not produce internally.
There's this video by Johnny Harris talking about China's monopoly of these cobalt mines in DR Congo. This is just an example of how much China is trying to establish a monopoly of global trade.
You see, there are now reports of China using this clear economic dependence by these countries for geopolitical benefits.
When the United States hand out economic relief funds and loans to poor countries, they demand something in return, no doubt. Most times, these countries have to agree to US foreign policies and even import some of its culture like gay rights, abortion rights, transgenderism, and lots of other things. This they call their democratic agenda.
But for China, it's quite different. The People's Republic has chosen to work with just about any willing country, not minding corruption, human rights concerns, political affiliations, ideologies and all.
You need money, you agree to sign the memorandum, and there you have it. Take what you want.
So, while China's BRI could lift as many as 7 million people out of poverty, according to World Bank, the nature of the BRI itself has made it easy for corrupt leaders in these countries to use these projects for political reasons. Politicians are using these projects for campaigns in their respective countries and building these structures where it suits them for political reasons. So we have a situation of politicians making these deals with their country's future at risk.
How will the countries be able to pay back such bad debt when the projects the monies are being used for are not even producing any results? While it appears as though China is being benevolent in building these projects and handing out these monies, what is least considered is the fact that these are loans and many countries are struggling to pay back. Djibouti, Sri Lanka are some countries that are already in serious crisis as a result of taking on too much Chinese debt for which they may never be able to pay back.
Djibouti's debt to China amounts to more than 70% of its GDP. Sri Lanka borrowed a huge amount of money from China to build this giant port we talked about, but then failed to pay back. When it became apparent that the country would default, China offered them a way out. That way out is where the problem is. China has taken full control of that port for a lease period of 99 years.
This is like handing out a part of your sovereign land to a superpower to do just about anything with it for a period of 99 years. Seems like colonization to me. But it's not just in Sri Lanka.
Tanzanian President John Magufuli said the loan agreements of BRI projects in his country were exploitative and awkward. He said Chinese financiers set tough conditions that can only be accepted by mad people because his government was asked to give them a guarantee of 33 years and an extensive lease of 99 years on a port construction. Magufuli said Chinese contractors wanted to take the land as their own, but his government had to compensate them for drilling the project construction. In May 2021, DRC's President 𝗪𝗪 Tshisekedi called for a review of mining contracts signed with China by his predecessor Joseph Kabila, in particular the 𝗪𝗂𝘂𝗧𝗂𝗵 multi-billion-dollar Mineral for Infrastructure agreement. China's plans to link its western Xinjiang province to Gwadar in the Balochistan province of Pakistan with its $500 million investment in the Gwadar port has met resistance from local fishermen protesting against Chinese trawlers and illegal fishing.
This is why the BRI project has led to accusation that China is using this economic strategy as a debt trap for poor and vulnerable countries around the world. But what is worse is using the same debt trap to fuel corruption and autocratic behavior in struggling democracies, allowing China to gain further foothold in these countries. But with all that said, it is good to point out that some American allies agree with the Belt and Road Initiative, as they see it as a means of development in this region.
According to estimates, the entire project today affects more than 60% of the world's population and approximately 35% of the global economy. The Maritime Silk Road is already the route for more than half of all containers in the world. This is why China is pushing for the expansion of more deep-water ports. Logistical hubs are being built and new traffic routes are being created. A 2019 study conducted by global economic consultants forecasted that the BRI was likely to boost world GDP by $7.1 trillion per annum by 2040. For Asia alone, estimates by the Asian Development Bank in 2017 point to investment needs of around $26 trillion until 2030. Around $14.7 trillion or half of Asia's infrastructure needs until 2030 lie in the energy and power sector, as 400 million people still lack access to electricity. As stated by China, the focus on connectivity within the BRI is both about facilitating trade and investment, and thereby development of neighboring countries. According to the World Bank, Belt and road transport corridors have the potential to substantially improve trade, foreign investment, and living conditions for citizens in these participating countries. So, these projects have the potential to boost the global GDP, particularly in developing countries. It could lift as high as 7 million people out of poverty, grant poor countries access to capital to boost their infrastructure, which is the bedrock of any meaningful development. The ports, skyscrapers, railroads, roads, bridges, airports, dams, coal-fired power stations, and railroad tunnels being constructed are among the best in the world, and they aid global trade and boost economic growth for the countries involved in these projects.
The most pressing concern being raised about this ambitious project is that China is not willing to be transparent. Yes, there are signs of debt trap diplomacy with the way China is handing out these loans, knowing quite well these countries will not be able to pay back. But if China were to be a little more transparent with these deals, those fears could be eliminated, even though not totally. Another top concern is control of the Indian Ocean. There is no doubt that Xi Jinping has his eyes set on controlling the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. These two routes are important to his dream of China's dominance on the global scene. But India is not going to give that up just because he wants it. That is where we have a problem, one that can lead to a major crisis if not handled now. And then there are the allegations of using ports for military purposes. China is not just building these ports and taking over them for economic reasons. Xi Jinping has been accused of trying to consolidate power not only at home by making himself president for life, he has an expanding military agenda. He is also using psychological and political influence over his counterparts in these countries receiving these Chinese loans. There are also allegations of China's use of telecommunications technology to surveil these governments. So the truth about this giant scheme by China is that the whole thing is shady at best. I mean, these are great projects with some dark intentions. Hence, we cannot really trust China to change the world, at least not for good. That will be all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.